Dr. Elena Martinez stood at the observation deck of Research Station, Kepler 442, watching the strange blue crystals pulse with light far below on the planet's surface. The crystals had been sending out energy signals for 3 months now, and Elena's team still could not figure out what they were trying to say. The 12 researchers on the station worked day and night, running tests and taking readings. But the crystals remained a mystery. Jake Morrison sat at his communication station, monitoring deep space signals as he did every day. His job was to watch for messages from Earth and the other human colonies, but lately he had been picking up strange readings from beyond the system. The readings were faint like whispers in the dark, but they were getting stronger each day. Jake had reported this to Elena several times, but she was too focused on the crystals to pay much attention to distant signals. Linda Brooks spent her time down on the planet's surface, studying the rock formations around the crystal fields. She had never seen anything like these structures before. The crystals seemed to grow in perfect geometric patterns as if someone had planted them there on purpose. When she touched them with her instruments, they would glow brighter for a few seconds, then return to their steady pulsing rhythm. Carlos Rivera kept watch over the station's security systems, making sure nothing dangerous approached their position. It was usually a quiet job since this system was far from any known trade routes or settled worlds. The only visitors they ever had were the supply ships from Earth that came every few months. Carlos often joked that he had the most boring job in space, but Elena always reminded him that boring was exactly what they wanted when trying to do scientific research. On the morning of day 93, Jake's instruments started screaming with alarm signals. The whispers from deep space had become roars, and his screens showed massive objects approaching the system at incredible speed. Jake called Elena to the communication room immediately, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. "Dr. Martinez, you need to see this right now," Jake said, pointing at his displays. "Something big is coming our way, and I mean really big." Elena looked at the readings and felt her heart sink. The objects were huge, each one larger than their entire research station. There were dozens of them, moving in perfect formation like a military fleet. But these ships did not look like anything humans had ever built. They were organic, twisted shapes that seemed to bend the light around them, making them hard to focus on even through the instruments. "How long until they reach us?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "At their current speed, maybe 6 hours," Jake replied. "But Elena, there's something else. I'm picking up the same signals from 17 other star systems. Whatever these things are, they're attacking multiple worlds at the same time." Elena called an emergency meeting of all station personnel. As the 12 researchers gathered in the main conference room, she explained what Jake had discovered. The room fell silent as everyone realized they were about to face something completely unknown and potentially hostile. "What do we do?" asked Linda, who had just returned from the planet's surface. "Should we try to run?" "Our ships aren't fast enough," Carlos said, checking his security reports. "If those things want to catch us, they will. Our best bet is to hide and hope they don't notice us." But even as Carlos spoke, new signals appeared on Jake's screens. The unknown fleet had split into smaller groups, and one group was heading directly for their station. There would be no hiding from whatever was coming. Elena made a decision that would change everything. "Jake, can you boost our communication array to maximum power?" "Sure, but why?" "Earth is months away by normal signals. Even if we send a message now, help won't arrive for a long time." "Not Earth," Elena said, thinking quickly. "Remember the experimental quantum communication system we installed last month? The one designed for faster-than-light data transmission?" Jake's eyes went wide. "You want to jury-rig it into an emergency beacon?" "Elena, that system was never tested for wide-range broadcasting. It might not work, or worse, it might explode. Do we have any other choice?" Elena asked, looking around the room at her frightened team. "If these things are attacking 17 star systems at once, this isn't just about us anymore. Every intelligent species in this part of the galaxy could be in danger." The team worked frantically for the next 4 hours, modifying their experimental communication array into a desperate cry for help. Linda and Carlos helped Jake rewire the power systems, while Elena programmed the message they would send. It had to be simple and clear, something that would make anyone who received it understand the danger they all faced. As the unknown fleet grew closer, Elena's instruments finally got a clear look at the attacking ships. What she saw made her blood run cold. The ships were not just organic looking, they were actually alive. Massive creatures floating through space, their bodies covered in weapons and armor. As she watched, one of the creatures opened its mouth and released smaller organisms that swarmed around it like parasites. "They're biological," Elena whispered to herself. "These aren't ships at all. They're some kind of spaceborne life form." The creatures had begun their attack on the other star systems, and Jake's instruments picked up the final transmissions from several worlds as they went silent forever. Entire civilizations were being wiped out in a matter of hours. Whatever these things were, they consumed everything in their path. "The beacon is ready," Jake announced. "But Elena, if I send this signal, every species with quantum communication technology will receive it instantly. We'll be announcing to the entire galaxy that Earth and humanity exist." Elena looked at the approaching fleet of biological horrors and made the most important decision of her life. "Send it," she ordered. "Send it to everyone." Jake activated the modified quantum beacon, and Elena's message shot out across space faster than light itself. The message was simple but desperate. "Unknown hostile force attacking all civilizations in Sector 7. Request immediate assistance. We may not survive long enough to explain." The beacon transmitted for exactly 30 seconds before the station's power systems overloaded and shut down. In that brief time, Elena's desperate plea for help had reached every corner of human space and beyond. Now all they could do was wait and hope that someone somewhere would answer their call. As the biological fleet surrounded their station, Elena and her team prepared for the worst. They had no weapons, no shields, and no way to escape. But they had done something that might save countless other worlds. They had sent humanity's first message to the galaxy, and that message was a cry for help in the face of an ancient evil that threatened all intelligent life. The stars had heard humanity's voice for the first time, and soon the galaxy would learn what happened when someone threatened the innocent, while humans were listening. Admiral Rebecca Stone was reviewing fleet reports in her quarters aboard the UES Constellation when the emergency alert began screaming throughout the ship. She had commanded humanity's outer defense fleet for 8 years, but she had never heard the Protocol 7 alarm before. Protocol 7 meant only one thing: an immediate threat to other intelligent species that required humanity's intervention. Rebecca rushed to the command bridge where her communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Walsh, was staring at his screens with wide eyes. The quantum beacon message was playing on repeat, and its desperate tone sent chills through everyone who heard it. Dr. Elena Martinez's voice carried across the bridge, begging for help against an unknown enemy that was destroying entire civilizations. "How many systems received this transmission?" Rebecca asked, taking her position in the command chair. "All of them, Admiral," Danny replied. "Every human colony, outpost, and ship with quantum communication equipment got this message at exactly the same time. I've never seen anything like it." Rebecca activated the fleet-wide communication system and began issuing orders that would mobilize the largest military force in human history. Within minutes, every ship captain in the outer colonies was receiving the same message. "Prepare for immediate deployment to Sector 7. Maximum combat readiness. All available vessels to report for duty." Captain Nathan Cross was eating dinner with his family when the alert reached his battle carrier UES Liberty. He kissed his wife and children goodbye, knowing he might not see them for months, and rushed to his ship. The Liberty was one of humanity's newest vessels, equipped with weapons and technology that most alien species would consider impossible. Commander Lisa Park received the alert while conducting stealth training exercises near the outer rim. Her reconnaissance ship, UES Shadow, was designed to be invisible to most known detection methods, and Lisa knew her ship would be crucial for gathering intelligence about this new enemy. She immediately set course for the fleet assembly point, her crew preparing their advanced scanning equipment. As ships from across human space began converging on the rally point, Admiral Stone reviewed the files that most alien species never knew existed. For over 100 years, humanity had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. After making first contact with the peaceful Talaviri traders, humans had learned about the dangers that threatened intelligent life throughout the galaxy. The Talaviri had told stories of ancient horrors that swept through space every few centuries, consuming entire civilizations and leaving only empty worlds behind. They spoke of parasitic species that fed on the neural energy of thinking beings, and of weapons so terrible they could crack planets in half. Most alien species lived in constant fear of these threats, but humans had decided to do something about it. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Barnes commanded the Marine Assault Forces aboard the UES Thunderbolt, one of the fastest ships in the human fleet. His soldiers were equipped with powered armor and weapons designed specifically for fighting unknown alien threats. Frank had trained his troops for every possible combat scenario, from boarding actions on space stations to ground assaults on hostile worlds. The secret that humanity had kept from the galaxy was their true technological capability. While other species relied on ancient jump gate networks and slow wormhole travel, humans had developed something much better. Their faster-than-light drives could travel between any 2 points in space without needing existing infrastructure, giving them tactical mobility that no other species possessed. Dr. Kevin Wright worked in the research labs aboard the UES Discovery, humanity's most advanced science vessel. His team had spent decades studying captured alien technology and reverse engineering it into human designs. The weapon systems on human ships were based on principles that other species considered theoretical impossibilities, powered by energy sources that should not have been able to exist. As the human fleet assembled, Admiral Stone made contact with every ship captain to explain the magnitude of what they were facing. The enemy had attacked 17 star systems simultaneously, which meant they possessed a fleet large enough to threaten the entire galaxy. This would not be a simple rescue mission, but a full-scale war against an unknown opponent. Captain Susan Hayes commanded the medical frigate UES Mercy, which carried the most advanced hospital facilities in human space. She knew that if the fleet encountered survivors from the attacked worlds, her ship would be responsible for treating injuries from weapons and technologies they had never seen before. Susan's medical team included specialists in alien biology and xenochemistry. The quantum communication array that had received Dr. Martinez's message continued monitoring transmissions from Sector 7, and what it detected made everyone realize how serious the situation had become. One by one, the civilizations under attack were going silent. Entire worlds that had been broadcasting for thousands of years suddenly stopped transmitting, their voices cut off in mid-sentence. Lieutenant Ryan Murphy sat in the linguistics department aboard the UES Constellation, working frantically to decode the enemy transmissions his equipment had intercepted. Ryan had spent years studying every known alien language, preparing for the day when humanity would need to communicate with other species. The sounds coming from the attacking fleet were unlike anything in his databases, organic and disturbing in ways that made his skin crawl. As more ships arrived at the assembly point, the true scope of humanity's military power became clear. 250 vessels of various sizes and configurations, from massive dreadnoughts that could level cities to small fighters designed for precision strikes. Each ship carried weapons and technology that represented the combined scientific knowledge of the entire human species. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Constellation, watching her fleet prepare for the most important mission in human history. The crews were nervous but determined, knowing they were about to face an enemy that had already destroyed civilizations older and more advanced than Earth. But they also knew something the enemy did not. Humanity had been preparing for this fight for over a century. The final ship to join the fleet was the UES Vengeance, commanded by Captain Joe Miller, one of the most experienced combat veterans in the human navy. Joe had fought pirates and rebels throughout the outer colonies, but he had never faced anything like what waited for them in Sector 7. His ship carried some of humanity's most secret weapons, including experimental technology that could theoretically destroy entire fleets. Admiral Stone gave the order to jump to faster-than-light speed, and the human fleet disappeared from normal space in a flash of blue energy. As they traveled toward Sector 7, their emergence from FTL would create energy signatures that would register on sensors across dozens of star systems. For the first time in galactic history, every spacefaring civilization would detect the same phenomenon simultaneously: the arrival of an unknown fleet, moving faster than should be possible. The galaxy was about to meet humanity, and the meeting would change everything forever. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 7, and what they saw made even the most experienced veterans pause in shock. 3 star systems that should have been alive with the lights of civilization were now dark and silent. The biological horrors that Dr. Martinez had warned them about were in the process of consuming their 4th target, a world inhabited by the peaceful Kethmori people. Admiral Stone watched from the bridge of the Constellation as her instruments showed the scope of the enemy fleet. Hundreds of the organic ships floated through space around the dying world, their living hulls pulsing with unnatural light. The creatures were massive, each one easily the size of a human battlecruiser, but they moved with the fluid grace of sea animals swimming through an ocean of stars. Captain Cross aboard the Liberty studied the tactical display and felt his blood run cold. The enemy ships were not just attacking the planet's cities, they were literally consuming them. Enormous tentacles reached down from orbit to wrap around entire buildings, lifting them into space where they disappeared into gaping mouths filled with rows of crystalline teeth. Commander Park's stealth ship Shadow moved closer to the enemy formation, her advanced sensors gathering intelligence about the biological fleet. What Lisa discovered changed everything they thought they knew about this threat. The creatures were not just ships piloted by an alien species, they were the aliens themselves. Each one was a living being the size of a skyscraper, evolved specifically for warfare in the vacuum of space. Lieutenant Murphy's linguistic equipment finally decoded some of the enemy communications, and what he heard made him sick to his stomach. The creatures called themselves the HFY, and they were not trying to conquer worlds but to feed on them. They consumed the neural energy of thinking beings, literally eating the thoughts and memories of entire civilizations. Admiral Stone made a decision that would echo through history. She opened communication channels on every known frequency and began broadcasting in perfect versions of 17 different alien languages, a feat that should have been impossible for a species making first contact with galactic civilization. Ryan Murphy had spent years studying intercepted alien transmissions, preparing for exactly this moment. This is Admiral Rebecca Stone of the United Earth Systems Fleet. Her voice carried across space to every ship in the system. We are responding to a distress call. Hostile forces, you will cease your attack immediately and withdraw from this system. You have 30 seconds to comply. The response from the HFY was immediate and predictable. The biological creatures turned their attention away from the dying planet and began moving toward the human fleet, their organic weapons charged with energy that bent light around them, and smaller parasitic organisms poured out of their bodies like a living cloud of death. What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the 30-second war. Captain Cross gave the order to fire, and the Liberty unleashed humanity's kinetic artillery. These weapons fired tungsten rods at significant fractions of light speed. Simple mass and velocity turned into devastating force. The HFY had evolved to absorb energy weapons and resist psychic attacks, but they had no defense against basic physics. The first volley of kinetic rounds tore through the enemy formation like bullets through paper. Creatures that had survived for thousands of years, that had devoured entire star systems, were suddenly ripped apart by chunks of metal moving faster than thought. Their biological armor, evolved over millennia to resist the most advanced energy weapons, was useless against simple momentum. Commander Park activated the Shadow's secret weapon systems, releasing what her crew called quantum viruses. These digital parasites were designed to infiltrate and crash enemy computer networks, but they worked just as well on the biological neural networks of the HFY. The creatures suddenly found their own consciousness under attack by predators that operated on principles they could not understand. Captain Miller's ship, Vengeance, deployed experimental weapons that the rest of the fleet had never seen before, gravity bombs that created miniature black holes, tearing the HFY apart at the molecular level. Reality distortion fields that made entire sections of space become hostile to organic matter. The creatures screamed across all frequencies as their ancient bodies were destroyed by forces they had never encountered. The biological fleet tried to retreat, but human ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything the HFY had ever faced. Captain Hayes moved the medical frigate Mercy into position to begin rescuing survivors from the planet below, while marine assault teams from the Thunderbolt boarded and cleared the few remaining enemy vessels. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes led his powered armor troops through the organic corridors of a captured HFY ship, fighting parasitic organisms that tried to burrow into their minds. The Marines' weapons were specifically designed for close combat against unknown alien threats, and they cut through the ship's defenses like a blade through flesh. Dr. Wright's science teams aboard the Discovery began analyzing wreckage from the destroyed enemy ships, gathering intelligence about HFY technology and biology. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The creatures were incredibly ancient, with genetic memories stretching back millions of years. They had been consuming civilization since before most current species had evolved intelligence. As the last HFY ship was destroyed, the surviving vessels of the local civilizations watched in stunned silence. The Kethmori people, who had been preparing to die with their world, suddenly found themselves rescued by beings they had never heard of. Human medical teams worked frantically to save as many survivors as possible, using technology that seemed like magic to the grateful aliens. Admiral Stone ordered the fleet to secure the system and begin search and rescue operations. Captain Susan Hayes coordinated medical relief efforts while her teams treated injuries from weapons that human doctors had never seen before. The survivors spoke of horrors beyond imagination, of watching their friends and families consumed by creatures that fed on thoughts and dreams. The battle had lasted exactly 30 seconds from the first shot to the last explosion. When the shooting stopped, the entire HFY fleet was nothing but debris drifting through space. The ancient predators that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia had been wiped out by a species they had never heard of, using weapons they could not comprehend. But the victory came with disturbing questions. Commander Park's intelligence teams discovered navigation data in the HFY wreckage that pointed to dozens of other systems, other targets the creatures had been planning to attack. Worse still, the data suggested the HFY were not operating alone, but were part of something much larger and more organized. As news of the battle spread through the quantum communication network, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. Every spacefaring civilization that had been monitoring the situation immediately went silent. The vast network of trade and communication that had connected hundreds of worlds for thousands of years simply stopped. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Dr. Elena Martinez woke up in the medical bay of the UES Mercy 3 days after her rescue from research station Kepler 442. Captain Amy Foster had personally overseen Elena's recovery, making sure the scientist received the best possible care after her ordeal with the HFY. As Elena's strength returned, she began to understand the magnitude of what had happened since she sent that desperate message into space. Captain Foster explained how the human fleet had arrived and destroyed the biological horrors in less than a minute. Elena could barely believe what she was hearing. The creatures that had seemed so terrifyingly powerful, that had consumed entire civilizations with ease, had been wiped out by humanity's military in 30 seconds. It seemed impossible, like something from a dream. But what disturbed Elena even more was what Captain Foster told her about the galaxy's reaction to the battle. Every single alien civilization had stopped communicating the moment humanity's victory became known. Trade ships that had been traveling between systems for thousands of years had simply turned around and headed home. Diplomatic channels that had carried messages across the galaxy for millennia had gone completely silent. Chief Intelligence Officer Peter Grant was working around the clock aboard the Constellation, analyzing the massive amount of data recovered from the destroyed HFY ships. What he discovered painted a picture of horror that stretched back through galactic history. The biological creatures had been consuming civilizations for over 50,000 years, leaving behind only empty worlds and silence. The HFY data cores contained detailed records of every species they had encountered, every world they had devoured, every civilization they had wiped from existence. Peter's team found references to hundreds of intelligent species that no longer existed, races that had been completely forgotten by the current galactic community. The scope of the genocide was beyond anything humans had imagined. Commander Park's analysis teams made an even more disturbing discovery. The HFY navigation computers contained coordinates for a massive artificial structure at the edge of the galaxy, something the size of a small moon that appeared to be constructed from materials that should not exist in nature. The coordinates were labeled in the alien database as Control Center Prime, suggesting the biological fleet was taking orders from someone else. Admiral Stone called a meeting of her senior officers to discuss these findings. The Admiralty room aboard the Constellation was filled with tension as the reality of their situation became clear. They had not just stumbled into a local conflict, but had apparently disrupted something much larger and more organized than anyone had expected. Lieutenant Murphy had been working to decode more of the alien transmissions intercepted during the battle, and his discoveries added another layer of mystery to the situation. Several of the dying civilizations had sent messages during the Vexhai attacks, and those messages contained references to something called the Ancient Council and the Old Agreements. It seemed like the galaxy operated under some kind of system that humanity knew nothing about. Dr. Wright's science teams aboard the Discovery made a breakthrough that changed everything. While studying the Vexhai biological samples, they discovered that the creatures were not natural evolution, but had been artificially created. Someone had taken a normal species and turned them into living weapons, specifically designed for consuming neural energy. The genetic modifications were incredibly sophisticated, suggesting a level of technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. As the human fleet worked to rescue survivors and gather intelligence, they began to notice something strange. Many of the alien species they encountered seemed to know more about humans than they should. Several survivors mentioned that their governments had been monitoring the young species from Sol system for decades, tracking human expansion and technological development. Captain Cross led a boarding party to examine one of the abandoned space stations they found drifting in the system. What his team discovered was deeply troubling. The station's computers contained detailed surveillance reports on human colonies, including information about military capabilities and population centers that should have been classified. Someone had been watching humanity very carefully for a very long time. The silence from the galactic community was broken suddenly and dramatically. A single transmission reached every human ship simultaneously, broadcast with power levels that suggested the sender had access to technology beyond anything in the known galaxy. The message was transmitted in perfect English, despite coming from beings that should have had no knowledge of human language. Admiral Stone listened to the transmission with growing alarm. The voice was artificial, speaking with the cold precision of a computer, but the words carried an authority that made it clear this was not a request, but a summons. The sender identified themselves as representatives of the Council of Ancient Races, beings that claimed to have maintained galactic stability for over 50,000 years. The message explained that humanity's recent actions had disrupted arrangements that kept the galaxy in order. The Vexhai, according to the Council, were not random predators but controlled tools used to manage galactic population and prevent any single species from becoming too powerful. By destroying the biological fleet, humanity had interfered with a system that had worked for millennia. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was leading rescue operations on the surface of the Keth Mori homeworld when the transmission reached his team. The alien survivors he was helping became terrified when they heard the Council's message, hiding in their rescue shelters and refusing to come out. One elderly Keth Mori finally explained that the Council of Ancient Races was legendary throughout the galaxy, spoken of in whispers as the true rulers of all intelligent life. The Council's message concluded with coordinates and a demand that humanity send representatives to explain their actions. The transmission made it clear that this was not a negotiation but a judgment. The ancient races had decided that humanity posed a threat to galactic stability and would be dealt with accordingly. Dr. Elena Martinez listened to the recording of the Council's message from her recovery bed and felt a chill run through her body. She had sent a simple distress call asking for help, but somehow that desperate plea had led to humanity challenging powers that had controlled the galaxy since before human civilization existed. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Admiral Stone faced the most important decision in human history. She could ignore the Council's summons and hope that humanity's military superiority would be enough to protect them from whatever retaliation might come, or she could accept the invitation and risk walking into a trap that could doom not just humanity, but every species they had sworn to protect. As reports continued to arrive from across human space, it became clear that the galaxy's silence was not just fear but preparation. Ancient defense networks were activating around systems that had been peaceful for thousands of years. Weapons platforms that had been dormant for millennia were coming online. The Council of Ancient Races was preparing for war, and humanity stood alone against powers that had ruled the stars since the dawn of galactic civilization. Admiral Stone decided to answer the Council's summons, but she would do it on humanity's terms. The fleet that approached the ancient coordinates was not the same force that had fought the Vexhai. Ships from every human colony and outpost had joined them, representing the full military might of human civilization. The UES constellation led a formation of over 500 vessels, each one armed with humanity's most advanced weapons. The Council's meeting place was a space station that defied every law of physics Elena had ever studied. The structure appeared to be made from crystallized starlight, its walls shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Gravity flowed in impossible directions, creating chambers where beings could walk on any surface regardless of orientation. The station was beautiful and terrifying, a monument to technologies that humanity could barely comprehend. Captain Helen Price commanded the diplomatic vessel UES Harmony, which docked with the ancient station under the watchful guns of the human fleet. Helen had been chosen to lead the negotiations because of her experience dealing with alien cultures. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what waited inside the council chambers. The beings that greeted humanity were representatives of the first species to achieve spaceflight in the galaxy. The Eternal Architects floated in spheres of controlled gravity, their crystalline bodies containing the accumulated knowledge of billions of years. The digital transcendence existed as pure information, appearing as shifting patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. The Time Weavers seemed to exist in multiple moments simultaneously, their forms blurring as they moved between past and future. Helen felt overwhelmed by the sheer age and power of the beings before her, but she forced herself to remember why humanity was here. These ancient creatures had allowed genocide to continue for 50,000 years, using species like the Vexhai to control and eliminate entire civilizations. Whatever their reasons, their system was built on the suffering of innocent beings. The Council spoke without words. Their thoughts transmitted directly into Helen's mind through technology she could not understand. They explained the true history of the galaxy, a story of careful management and controlled evolution. For millennia, they had guided the development of younger species, preventing any single race from growing powerful enough to threaten galactic stability. The Vexhai were just one of many tools the Council used to maintain order. When species became too advanced or too aggressive, biological predators would be sent to eliminate them before they could spread chaos throughout the galaxy. Wars were orchestrated to keep civilizations focused on local conflicts rather than galactic expansion. Trade routes were controlled to prevent dangerous technologies from spreading too quickly. Admiral Stone listened to the Council's explanation through the communication link and felt anger burning in her chest. These ancient beings spoke of genocide and manipulation as if they were gardening, casually removing species they considered weeds in their perfect galactic garden. The suffering of billions was nothing more than necessary maintenance to them. The Council offered humanity a choice that was no choice at all. They could accept integration into the existing system as a client species, following Council directives and abandoning their independent expansion. In exchange, humanity would be allowed to survive and even prosper under Council protection. The alternative was systematic extinction, carried out by weapons and forces that had destroyed species far more advanced than Earth. Captain Price delivered humanity's response exactly as Admiral Stone had instructed. "We reject your authority. We reject your system. We reject the idea that intelligent beings should live in fear of forces beyond their control. If you want to test humanity's resolve, you are welcome to try. But understand this. Every species watching this moment will see what happens when ancient tyranny meets human determination." The Council's reaction was swift and terrible. Ancient weapons that could reshape matter at the atomic level were deployed against the human fleet. Reality-warping technologies that could erase objects from existence struck without warning. Space itself became hostile around the human ships, as the Council unleashed forces that had been sleeping for thousands of years. But humanity had prepared for this moment since Dr. Martinez first sent her desperate message. The quantum communication array that had carried her distress call had been working continuously for weeks, linking every human ship, colony, and outpost in an instantaneous network. When the Council attacked, they did not face a single fleet, but the coordinated response of an entire species. Human ships emerged from faster-than-light travel around every Council installation simultaneously. The ancient beings had expected to fight a primitive species with limited technology, but instead they faced an enemy that had been studying their methods and preparing countermeasures for decades. Human weapons designed specifically to fight reality-warping technology struck back at the Council's forces. Captain Cross led the Liberty in a direct assault on the Council's primary station, his kinetic weapons tearing through defenses that had protected the ancient structure for millennia. The Council's energy shields were designed to stop conventional weapons, but they could not deflect simple mass moving at relativistic speeds. Commander Park's stealth ships deployed quantum viruses that infiltrated the Council's information networks, turning their own communication systems against them. The digital transcendents found their pure information bodies under attack by digital predators that corrupted their data and scattered their consciousness across empty space. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ancient technologies that could control time and space clashed with human innovation that adapted and evolved in real time. The Council's weapons were powerful beyond imagination, but they were designed to fight the civilizations of 50,000 years ago, not a species that had spent a century preparing for exactly this kind of war. Captain Miller's experimental weapons proved devastating against enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. His gravity bombs created localized distortions that pulled the Time Weavers back into linear time, making them vulnerable to conventional attack. Reality distortion fields turned the Council's own space warping technology against them. When the fighting ended, the ancient Council of Races had fallen. Their installations were dark and silent, their weapon systems destroyed, their grip on galactic civilization finally broken. But Admiral Stone made a decision that surprised every species that had been watching the battle. Instead of claiming dominion over the galaxy, humanity broadcast a new message to every civilization that had been living in silence and fear. The stars belong to all of us, Admiral Stone's voice carried across the galaxy. The age of ancient tyranny is over. Any species that threatens others will face humanity's response. Any species that seeks peace will find humanity's friendship. The choice, as always, is yours. Dr. Elena Martinez returned to her research, but now she studied the ruins of Council technology alongside scientists from dozens of species. The galaxy slowly emerged from its fearful silence as civilizations realized they were free to explore, expand, and communicate without ancient interference. The age of silence was over, and the age of humanity had begun.